do that Monday, because this isn't broadcast live.
Oh, it is.
This is a working meeting, so it's just on Zoom.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll add that to the, what do you want to
It's
do?
like
Just announce?
every meeting from now on.
Yeah.
Just remind people that the election's June
Yeah,
first.
she's pretty, she's good. Good
And
about
we
doing
want
that.
as many people,
Remind,
we want people to vote absentee if possible.
Okay,
I mean, we will have, they'll be able to vote that day.
all
but
right.
We prefer to have a lower turnout. That day.
Yeah, you know what, do you want to set the little blurb? Or just send me a little blip, email me a little blip, and we can just read. Or whatever you want us to say. Yeah, anything. It's, you know, blah, 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 voting is this day, for
Okay.
absentee ballot, do this. If you
No, that's
wanna
fine.
do
Monday's
this.
fine.
Yeah, doesn't say send it, just send it.
Okay.
Mine is, I have terrible allergies right now, so people are probably gonna go crazy.
This, just to add to your list for fall or something.
Okay.
The, I think there's still hot water in that toilet.
Is there? Which one?
Maybe it's not all the time. The one in the little room, not the handicap one. I mean, I don't know if it's in the handicap one. 'cause I don't use that
Check
one.
it again. The one on the main floor, you're saying?
Yeah.
All right, let me have him check that again.
Yeah. And at least the left-hand sink is extremely slow. The water will.
Oh, he's supposed to be, I gotta remind him about that anyway. He was gonna unclog some stuff for us. Hi, guys. Can you hear me? Sorry, hold on. I'm trying to admit Pete, but it's being weird. There we go.
How do we do that? If I don't have, I can call in on the phone. No.
Decision.
All right. Oh, I'm just gonna send a little blurb from Karen for the Monday meeting, since this one's not gonna be. Thank you.
No worries. All right. Get this down. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. Jim and Pete, you can hear, yeah?
Yes, I can
I'm
hear
gonna close the front door. Hold on, just give me 1 minute.
you.
Okay, sorry about that. Did you, I put out the reverse 911 today. Did you get it?
Yes,
How did it sound?
as always, your dulcet tones are much appreciated.
Diane says it sounded great.
Oh,
Sounds
good. I wrote it myself, so I was nervous. Well, I took blurbs from everybody, and I'm like, well, I think that'll do
No, I
it.
think it was very well done. Thank you for doing that.
Certainly.
Nicely done.
And I don't think it hurts, and I agree with you. I think doing that, it helps people know that at least we're thinking about them and we're trying here. So,
Well, I can tell you from personal experience also that the outreach from the Council on Aging continues. Apparently, we are on the senior citizen list. So we have received a call from them, 2 of them actually.
good.
Very nice.
Yeah, it is. Especially with everything going on, it's even more important, you know.
Well, like we said earlier, it's the outreach that matters, and hopefully if there's a problem, we can deal with it. So
Exactly.
much appreciated from Council on Aging folks.
Yeah, they've been great. The new, I don't know if you've had a chance to meet Becky, probably your wife has, but Becky, who's the new outreach worker, is fantastic.
Oh, I've met her.
She's just so cheery all the time, and she's perfect for down there. She's exactly what they needed.
Well, we're glad to have the team in place and seem to be doing a fine job for folks.
Yeah. Hopefully soon we'll have a fairly new space for them, whatever that means. It'll be good.
So, Mike, are we ready to proceed, do you think?
I don't know, Loring I put it, oh, here she comes. There we go.
Okay.
Loring was going to be here. She may have to step out here and there, but she's going to
Okay.
try to do most of the meeting.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks very much for all the help on those documents this morning. I do appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for all the work pulling that together. I know that you were chasing around those documents and trying to get that lined up.
It's been a real hassle with those guys, but at least we didn't lose access to all those thin clients.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to put some documents up. I'm learning with the Zoom, getting more Zoom. I'm learning the Zoom speak here. So you'll have to tell me what you want me to show.
Is that the guys you told me about?
Jim, you're in a different location this time. I
Yeah,
see
no, I haven't,
cupboards.
honestly, no, I haven't heard from them.
Oh, I turned the chair around.
Unless they talked to, if they came in, I don't know if they may have talked to Karen or Mike Kaczynski. I don't know. But they're in the midst of a selectmen's meeting right now, so.
Jim.
Well, you
Yeah,
We're ready to start.
I think. Are you going to hit the record button, Karen? So we're recording
Yes,
this.
let me make sure. Yes, we are recording. We are good.
Okay, good afternoon to the community of Millis. My name is Loring Barnes. I am the chair of the Millis Select Board. We are assembling this afternoon to have a focused deliberation on the state of the fiscal year 21 budget with information as best we currently know it. I'd like to introduce some of the players who are here and invite the public to participate. My colleagues, James McCaffrey and Peter Germain, have joined us, as well as our town administrator, Michael Kaczynski, and our operations director, Karen Bure. Carol Johnston is our director of finance. James McKay oversees the DPW budget, one of the more significant budgets among them. Deirdre Gilmore, and I think that's all the people who I recognize from those who are identified as attending participants. So I am going to, first of all, I was asked to let the community of Millis know that we currently do intend to proceed with elections on June 1st. For this, we are asking for people to register for absentee ballots. And I'm wondering if Mr. Kaczynski, if you could explain how that in fact works with respect to getting registered ballots appropriately submitted for being counted.
Yeah, so certainly if people have specific questions, they should contact the town clerk's office. And I believe they can request absentee ballots either by email or by calling the office. And A ballot will be mailed to them, and they can fill it out and mail it back. There may be an interim step in there, and I think the best thing to do for folks that would like to vote by absentee ballot, which we're recommending because of the COVID-19 pandemic, is to call or email the town clerk's office. We don't have that number handy. Karen, do you have that number at your fingertips?
Or, say that again?
Town clerk's office number.
Yep, 508 376 7046.
Right, and even though the town hall is closed for public traffic in the building, staff is there during all regular office hours. So people can call the office and ask for the ballot, and they will walk them through the steps.
Excellent. Okay, so this is an annual process that began back in early February and even before then, when the various town department directors came before the select board and therefore the community to recap their accomplishments for the prior fiscal year and to identify either with what we would call level spending and or additional spending to the prior budget, what services they would like to either maintain or enhance. And that is to say, level spending assumes that the spending will always have some increases because of contracted budget and compensation negotiations. So we have now been through that process, and now we are very actively working with the Finance Committee and the various town departments to look forward to fiscal year 21. And it will not surprise anybody to hear that when we started this process, we could have one outlook. And now as we gather today on April 22nd, the outlook is obviously has been certainly dimmed somewhat by the reality of what will happen to state budget levels as well as local revenue as a result of our response to the COVID-19 crisis. So the budget proposals before us have been reviewed by the town administrator and the director of finance, and I'm going to let them amplify the highlights of what they are now recommending to the select board and invite my colleagues to participate in an open conversation in which they ask questions or indicate any concerns about the budget that has been prepared for us. And Karen, you're going to put some of these pages up on the screen for the community.
I am.
Correct?
So, yes, so let me know
Okay.
what we're looking for first.
Okay.
I think at this point, the first sheet that we're going to be looking at is the revenue sheet that includes the 200,000. It has the pink line on it near the top.
Okay, is that that's this? Let me know if it's the right one here. Hold on.
And again, I do, Madam Chair, I do have just a little introduction before we get into the
Yeah.
detail.
All right, can everybody see that?
No, not yet.
Okay, hold on a minute.
Why don't I begin talking while
Yes, please do.
is working on that. So as the board knows, because you had a budget meeting back in February with all the departments, we've been working on our FY21 annual budget. The department heads have worked hard to pull together their budget requests and have submitted those. Carol, the finance director, and I have been working on consolidating all the information, looking at our ever-evolving revenue situation, and putting together documents for the board's review that really outline at least a snapshot in time of where we are. But there's a lot of uncertainty moving forward, as we know. Before we get to the documents in detail, I'll just quickly give an overview of the documents that I know you just received within the last half hour. So I know they're new to you, and we'll be answering any questions you have on these. The first document is an FY21 revenue summary based on the current information we have available for revenues for FY21, which includes the governor's local aid numbers. We know those numbers are certainly in flux because of the current economic conditions, and we can talk about that later about what types of actions we might take to prepare for possible reductions in local aid. So just to summarize that, the total new revenues based on those estimates for both the school and municipal budgets after the must fund items are addressed, such as insurance and debt, retirement, those accounts, the new funds in Tri-County and other accounts. We have a total of $411,715 available to be split between, of new revenue to be split between the school and municipal departments. Using the formula that we've used over the last 20 plus years, school at 65% would be an additional $267,615, and additional revenues for the town would be $144,100. Now, if we, the next, so the sheet that's on the screen right now actually shows a different scenario. That is the FY21 revenue summary with the inclusion of $200,000 in stabilization funds, which we consider a borrowing from the stabilization funds to be refunded at the fall annual town meeting through anticipated cannabis revenues. And if we were to use those funds, the total new revenues available for the school and municipal budgets would be $611,715. And again, the breakdown of that under 6535 would be school $397,615 and municipal $214,100. And we can talk about that particular item in a little more detail as we go through the documents. And then the last document is the actual FY21 budget document, the 9-page document showing the town budget history by department, as well as FY21 budget requests by department. Does everyone have all those documents? Do the board members have those? Those were emailed out about 45 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I not have them. Okay. So based on the current revenue estimates for FY21 and looking at the budget requests, the municipal budget requests, we'll set the school aside a little bit because they have to look at those numbers in comparison for their needs for next year. But looking at the municipal departments, in order to balance that, balance the budget based on the municipal budget requests we have, those requests have to be cut by $647,202, which is quite a substantial sum to cut. The finance director and I have been working over the past really a few months, but past couple of weeks in earnest on looking at budgets, meeting with department heads, and we for this Monday are certainly prepared to make proposal for budget reductions and cuts in a total of $462,402, which reduces our deficit down to $184,801. Obviously, we need to get that differential down to zero. We are still working on those budgets, and we will again need to close that gap to balance the budget. And again, we do anticipate being able to discuss this in more detail at your meeting on Monday.
Can I interrupt for just a second, please, Madam
Yeah.
Chair? I want to make sure people understand what the word cut means, budget cut.
Yeah, I'll let me clarify the word cut here. The cut is a cut to the budget request. It's not a cut to the current budget.
Okay.
So that's based on requests. So that's not a reduction in necessarily the reduction in a departmental budget. It's a reduction from what they're requesting for next year.
Essentially, the budget requests from department heads responded to our effort to ask them to analyze within their departments the funds they would need to operate their departments efficiently and effectively, but also if they were going to recommend any additional budget items to better serve the citizens of Millis. So there's a combination of things in there from the budget request. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that who may be listening in. This is not, at this stage of the game, it's not a cut to current service levels. It's a cut for budget requests.
Correct.
It doesn't mean we might not face other cuts, but that's what we're talking about right now.
Right, and it doesn't mean we might not necessarily have some service cuts should we have to make the full cut based on other increases that need to be put in place, such as union contractual agreements and other
Right.
things. But it's not a actual cut to current services by that full amount. So if the board chooses to utilize the 200,000 from stabilization from anticipated cannabis revenues and to put those back into stabilization at the fall town meeting, then the current required cut on the municipal side, that, and use the word cut as far as requests that have to be done, is an additional $114,801. And again, these are all just municipal departments, not school department. Also on the budget document that you have, the 9-page budget document, I just wanted to note that as part of the budget planning, $97,000 of the police department budget is not shown there and will be deferred until the fall annual town meeting, where HCA funds can be utilized to fund the resource officer and to fund the police marijuana stipends. And this is all because the way the state processes work, there's a major delay in when the state will allow us to use the cannabis revenues. The revenues have to be collected. They have to be closed out at the end of the fiscal year, and then they have to be certified into the free cash, which is usually done in October. And it's not until after that certification that the town can legally use those funds. And the state has informed us that the approval of our budgets would be in doubt from the state perspective if we were trying to utilize those funds without having them certified into free cash. I don't know if there's any questions on that particular issue. Going back to the main documents, Carol did a great job on putting together these documents. Again,
Mike, just for 1 second, I want to interrupt. I want the people to understand that this position that has been taken by the state revenue folks is one that we have tried to convince them is unreasonable multiple times. Particularly because we have, about $170,000 to $200,000 in the bank already. We've already collected it. But the DOR continues to be of the view, not just for Millis, but for anybody, that because this revenue is first-time revenue and we have no track record really of determining how much it might be in the future, that they're going to take the most conservative view and not allow us to recognize it until free cash is certified, at which point in time we will be able to do that. But that's not only the HCA payment, it's the sales tax payment as well. So I want people to understand that, particularly when we get into discussions about utilization of stabilization money, it may be prudent to do that as much as we don't want to, because we know even prior to certification that we have that money in the bank, really. So anyway, just a point.
right. So I think it's good to point out that, say, a dollar in sales tax on any cannabis related item that's made, say, in this July, is not available for the town to spend until the following November, approximately 15 months later. So there is a big delay on when these funds can be used, and therefore there's really no cannabis funds in this current budget. Certainly in light of the situation and in light of what's going on, I think it's something that the board has to take under consideration as a possible usage. And the only way to really do it from a mechanical standpoint is through stabilization and then a repayment to the stabilization fund. But that's something that you'll have to discuss moving forward. And obviously, looking at the big picture from a revenue standpoint, certainly we're in the same position as most other communities are in Massachusetts and largely across most of the United States. We don't know what the future holds as far as state aid. We don't know what the future holds as far as federal grants to states and communities, as far as COVID-related losses to business and revenue. I believe right now there's a bill winding its way or being proposed in Congress for hundreds of billions of dollars for states and local communities that have lost revenue and are trying to maintain all their services, including public safety and schools and so forth, as this crisis continues. So, but again, at this point, we don't know what any federal funds might entail and how that ripple effect would affect us and our state aid from the Commonwealth. So there's a lot of questions out there right now in regards to that. So like I said, Carol did a great deal of work putting these together. With the board's permission, I'd like to ask if she could be given an opportunity just to go through the two revenue sheets, and then we can discuss if there's any questions, and then talk a little bit about the budget requests and then the next steps where we go from here.
Yeah, that sounds fine. And I just want to say to my colleagues, I fully expect this conversation to be very dynamic. So just feel free to ask questions as they arise. You don't need to go through the chair. I hope that makes it more efficient for everybody.
Carol, did you want to talk a little bit about the revenue sheets that you put together and just kind of briefly go over the major items in those? And then Karen, you could maybe just scroll down as she goes through
Yeah,
those.
just tell me where you are if you need, just poke me if you need to be scrolling.
Carol, can you hear us?
Oh, hold on.
Carol's not, yeah, I don't see her shown.
Hold on, let me look back. She's there, but
The dangers of live TV production.
Carol, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I could hear you the whole time. I
Ah.
wasn't muted on this end.
That's weird. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't realize it was on mute.
That's okay.
So
That's all
just,
right.
Carol, just holler if you need me to change the page here.
Okay, I'm going to just go over the one that's on the screen now. The only difference between that and the other one is the fact that we added that 200,000 in for the stabilization fund.
Okay.
So on your local taxes, that 26,602,826 is comprised of the base factor, which are your real estate taxes, a 2.5% increase, as well as the new growth, and the debt exclusion is included in that number. The next line is the state aid, and
Carol?
on the state aid, yes?
Carol, may I just ask, this is Loring, may I just ask, the assumption is that the real estate taxes always go up 2.5%, but we're in the middle of a major financial crisis. So is there any reason why we always have to make an assumption on the basis of a 2.5% increase, or can we be more conservative in that?
Well, if I can jump in for a second, the 2.5 is a statutory limit. The board can, from a policy standpoint, decide that you're not going to tax to the statutory limit and recommend a budget that has revenues less than that. But the 2.5% increase under the local taxes is probably the most solid revenue number in here because it is a statutory. It's based on the prior year, and that is the legal limit, and it's my understanding that for a number of years that's the point at which the town has been taxing. So it'd be a policy decision if it was dropped below that.
Which is part of what this whole conversation is, correct?
Correct. The board does need to have a policy discussion about the revenues, the makeup of revenues, and whether it's willing to go forward with those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
So these revenue numbers were generated based on prior assumptions that the 2.5% would increase. If that's a change, the sooner we know, the better, because that impacts your ability to fund your budget. There's a 2.5% growth factor in there for new growth, and your debt exclusions included in that number as well for the $26,602,000. These numbers haven't changed since they were given out to everybody back in January or February. So there shouldn't be any surprises to these numbers. The debt exclusion.
Carol.
Yep.
Carol,
Yep.
just a moment. I just want to make sure that, again, the variance of $634,262 in local property taxes, that comprises an increase of 2.5% over the prior year's real estate tax bill, plus an assumption of new growth, which is new housing, new businesses, whatever, new real estate on the rolls. And it also
Right.
includes the money we can raise, or we have to raise really, for the debt exclusion.
Right. So the difference.
Let me just.
The difference. Yeah, go ahead.
But the debt exclusion number was in FY20.
Right, but the debt exclusion went down this year
Right.
by 600,000. So excuse me, 500,000. So if you add that to that 634,000,
Right.
you're really getting $1.2 million in real estate revenues increase year over year.
Okay.
So then the next number is your state aid. The state aid is your Chapter 70 money, your charter reimbursement, your school choice, your undesignated amount, the general allotment you can use, library offset, veterans benefit, and exemption for the veteran and blind. And that amounts to $6,510,317. The next category is the available funds. In the available funds category, we have transfer from special funds, which are the cemetery and cell phone and ambulance fund, as well as from the cemetery perpetual care interest. Along with that is, included in that number is $311,248 of free cash. And then the additional $200,000 anticipated from the stabilization fund, bringing that to $859,224. On our local receipts number, the big number in the local receipts is your motor vehicle excise. And that's projected to be 1.2 million of the 2.6 million. And then you have all of your other local monies, which are your meals tax, transfer tax, police details, that sort of thing is included in your local receipts.
Carol, Mike, this is Loring, but weren't these forecasts put in place before we arrived in this window of time, and shouldn't they therefore be adjusted downward? Because they show, they're based on the assumption of steady growth, and we all know the assumption needs to change.
They're based on a 1% growth factor. We certainly can change them if the board thinks that that's the right thing to do. The item that's in here that would be impacted mainly would be meals tax, but that would be starting July 1st. The expectation is that restaurants will be back open July 1st. So I'm not sure that you would see any decrease in what we've budgeted conservatively for that meal tax for next year. If we find that things are not going to open in July, or that we're going to have a big impact, we would have to discuss it at the November town meeting and make appropriate adjustments then.
Can you please distinguish for us the distinction between tuition assessment and school choice?
Tuition assessment, I believe, is when the students leave your community to go to another community. School choice is the money you get in for people that are coming into your school system.
So one's a
You must
cost.
So one's a revenue and one's an expense.
right.
Okay. They're both showing as revenue, though. I guess I'm confused about that. Or, I'm sorry,
It's-
expenses.
Those are charged.
Why would school choice be an expense? If that's income.
On the school, those are shared chargeback expenses, so they do have expenses that go out from the school on that. Those are those categories that are right there, the first, the county assessment, the state assessment, the MBTA assessment, the sped charges, receipts, tuition assessment. Those are all of the charges that we get charged from the state, that we have to pay the state. So that's why they're included in this category here. School choice is, we receive from the state as well, but we have to have an offset for that. And the library, we receive from the state, but we have to have an offset for that as well. Those two amount to $460,000.
It is confusing, Lori. I agree. The way the state kind of requires us to do it does create some confusion there. But those adjustments have to be made every year to really, and there's usually an offset to state aid we receive every year based on these numbers. And in many cases, we get actual negative state aid from year to year because of a lot of these chargebacks from the state.
So Mike, to the extent that either of these is quote unquote revenue, are they attached to the current 65-35 formula that we put out there to be rediscussed, given that the profile of the town is so different?
I believe that, but Carol can.
Yeah, so the school choice and the library are included in your state aid number above. So they're being removed at this point on the expense portion. You'll see that. But on the other items above there, county assessment, state assessment, MBTA, down to tuition assessment, those items we don't receive money from the state for. This is money we have to pay to the state. So that's a pure expense. The school choice and library, that's why they call it an offset, because you receive the money in, but then you have to pay it back out.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Just please chime in.
So we can continue with the expense portion.
Please.
Here. So under the general insurance, you can see the general insurance is increasing year over year by $66,944. And your employee benefits are increasing year over year by $303,000.
And just if I may, just a note on the general insurance, it is a bit of a jump, but just to realize a portion of that is because we have some new buildings, the value of which is much higher than the older buildings. So some of that is the value of the town's assets to be insured has increased.
The next one in the category is the stormwater utility fees. Those are going up year over year. The biggest factor on that is the new Clyde Brown School. It's a much greater impervious surface area than the previous one. Tri-County School Assessment, unfortunately, is going up another $241,000 this year. It's going up from $807,000 to $1,049,000. Our non-excluded debt service is going down by 85,671 this year.
Does anybody here know how many students that means we now fund to go to Tri-County? And isn't the cost of the Tri-County tuition basically 2 to 1 or something thereabouts per student?
I
So
was,
Tri-County, the enrollment went up by 10. In last year it was 60 and this year it's 70.
And I will say that vocational schools tend to have higher costs of tuition than local schools within the community. So, or the in-town secondary school. So pretty much in all cases, whenever a student goes from their local in-town high school to a regional vocational school, the tuition is markedly higher.
And we don't have any negotiation of that, right? I know we have a fabulous advocate in Jane Harden, but is there a process on that end of negotiating this tuition? Because it just seems like it's an out of control cost, and I don't see any contraction on the expenses on the school side. And I understand the reason for that, because you're plucking 1 or 2 students out of a classroom is not going to change the profile of staff count and such resources. But $1 million on this is a really, really painful hit for the town. And it doesn't, and it's outside of the 65-35 anything, correct?
Yes, it basically is considered required costs that are outside, or fixed costs that are outside of the split that we use. So certainly there is, some frustration on the part of the costs going up and how that impacts us here on other expenses. But this process is set by state statute and state regulations, and Tri-County is doing, as far as we're aware, is doing everything appropriately within the scope of those regulations. And there is a large call for additional state aid to districts because of the effect of not only regional voc schools and their increasing costs, but as well as charter schools. So that's been obviously a major flashpoint of discussion with the governor's office as well as the legislature to try to address that. And there really hasn't been any true fixes to that put in place yet. So it does continue to put a strain on our ability to be able to provide education here in the town, as well as other services in the town.
So the bottom line here is that in terms of shared expenses, the increase is $555,000. Almost all of it is from employee benefits and Tri-County assessment.
Right, exactly.
So the only control over those are really headcount and enrollment. I mean, that's the dynamic of those things.
Exactly, right.
To say that we have no control over it is not accurate. But the control really has to do with enrollment at the Tri-County, and question, do you want to influence that, or is it the right way for the students to be educated? And with employee benefits, it's headcount, because we are now in a situation that we've renewed with the GIC for a period of 2 years, while we review whether there's alternative ways of providing excellent healthcare insurance to our employees. But that's where we are for this fiscal year.
Yes.
And it doesn't make it any less painful, but that's kind of where we are based upon the model that we're operating under.
Yes.
Is this a time to bring up the 65-35 discussion, or not the time?
I would probably recommend leaving that until we get through most of the other budget matters. Be my recommendation anyway.
No problem.
I would concur because I think there's some discussion that's going to take place.
Proceed.
the-
Don't hold on me. Sorry.
So in the remaining portion of this is the must fund warrant articles. We have $327,000 worth of must fund and only $311,000 in our free cash. So we need an additional $15,967 to pay these must funds, bringing the total expense shared by up to $571,254. So again, if you agree on adding the $200,000 from the stabilization fund, that would bring the new revenue available for appropriation to $611,000. Again, with the split that Mike Kozinski had mentioned earlier, the school share of $65,000 with the additional $200 would be $397,615, and the town share would be 35% would be $214,100.
I guess there are any questions on the revenue? As Carol had said, the only difference between the two sheets is that one item under available funds of $200,000 in stabilization.
Well, I guess the question that we face initially, before we get to the new revenue available, is the board's view of seeking to utilize some of the stabilization fund to fund our operations. And the rationale is that amount of money, because of what we know is in the bank, so to speak, from the recreational marijuana business, that there's a reasonable chance that we'd be able to restore that to some degree. At this point in time, you know, the broader issue really is utilization of stabilization funds. And, you know, we have a stabilization fund that's in adequate shape. It's certainly not overfunded. But to the points made earlier about potential revenue shortfalls, which would make the numbers, these numbers don't actually, the revenue numbers actually don't happen, then the backstop is stabilization or, you know, reductions in budgets. So however we frame the discussion about, okay, here's the amount left and how is it going to be shared between town and the municipal and the school, I think we need to have a conversation about, you know, this dip into stabilization and whether or not we think it makes sense. My initial view is that it's still a fairly conservative number. I do believe, based on you know, accounts, that we have a reasonable chance of realizing that number from stabilization, from at least from growth in marijuana. But I do think we have to assume, in terms of that money, at this point in time, you know, assume the worst, that the recreational marijuana business will not be able to reopen before the end of the fiscal year. Now, if that's the case, then the revenue expectation is lower, although there will be some additional funding coming from that business because it did operate, you know, in February and part of March. And it's a quarterly payment. So November, December, January was the first quarter. February, March, April will be the second quarter, with a payment coming due by the end of May. But, you know, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's probably at best going to be half of what we got before. And then after that, we have no idea. You may have noticed that the governor continues to maintain that this is not an essential business. There was litigation over it by some marijuana business owners where the court ruled against them. The judge did indicate that he felt that there was plenty of good reasons to allow them to be open as essential businesses, but he was not going to overrule the governor's call at this point in time. So anyway, I think that we have a conversation about stabilization and whether or not this is a prudent thing to do at this point in time.
I have a concern, since we don't know what's going to happen with the recreational marijuana. I prefer to play it more conservatively, regardless of the fact that it is going to hurt us to a certain extent. But I am very concerned that we not commit ourselves, in essence, to something that may not come about just because of what's going on in the economy right now. The 200,000, pulling it out of stabilization with the prospect of paying it back because of the marijuana fund, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with that. Pulling it out of stabilization and understanding that it may not get paid back is a different view entirely. But that's one that I think deserves some discussion.
Well, if I may, Pete, I agree with you 100%. I mean, the basic question here is, are we in a situation right now, based on all that we know, that it is prudent at this point in time to start to dip into stabilization? And Carol, can you just remind us, what does the stabilization account look like right now? How much is in it?
We have $1.8 million in the stabilization.
Stabilization, okay. So I think I agree with my colleague here that the real debate is about whether or not at this point in time, assuming zero will come in to replace it, that this is the first step, first point in time at which we may dip into stabilization to try and maintain service levels. That's the real question. I agree with you, Mr. Attorney.
And I'll just, if I may, just to say that I don't believe the board has to make that decision today. I think that we can, present some more detailed budgetary figures on the adjustments that have to be made to the budget requests to meet both, with the, at least from the municipal side, I'd have to, defer to the school for impacts to the school department, but to look at what the impacts would be on the municipal side to adjust budget adjustments for both with and without the 200,000 for next year's budget, of which 70,000 would be municipal department revenues and 130 would be school.
For what it's worth, I've got one other comment I'd like to have people think about at this point. I did talk with Representative Linsky yesterday regarding what he thinks might happen with, if you will, state aid. He preferred not to discuss it at this point because they're about to go into meetings at the state on precisely that issue. But there's no question in anyone's mind that it's not going to come out at the levels we would like. Beyond that, I can't get any commitments in terms of what to expect, but that leaves me more concerned because we may end up where we have to use stabilization, but that's a case of have to use it for whatever we decide versus we have some options now. They're not pleasant ones, don't get me wrong, but I'm quite concerned as to the impact both at the end of this year when they finally are able to get budget numbers realigned and what might happen next year. And just so you're aware, we did talk about aid from the state. We also talked about aid from the feds. Let's just say no one's overly confident on that one either at this time for a variety of reasons that we can discuss perhaps some other time.
Well, trying to read the tea leaves is hard.
Yep.
Clear from a statement by the Senate Majority Leader yesterday that another round of relief is going to be much harder, at least from his point of view, to get through. And unfortunately, there was, I think, as we've all read, a substantial effort to try and get some state and local aid included in the current bill, and it did not succeed.
Correct.
So I think that, I think that your comments are well taken as to what, what we should do. And I do think we need to be able to see what is the impact on our operation, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but this for discussion purposes, what's the impact on our operation of, I guess option 2, which is to not dip into stabilization at all at this point in time. That still has a, somewhat perhaps optimistic view of what local aid is going to be. But it doesn't include dipping into stabilization at this point in time. I think in general, we and maybe that's the plan for further discussion at this meeting by going over the budget, but the big number is important to know. The actual impact on operations is really important at this point in time. And you talked about trying to work, Mr. Kaczynski, trying to work some budget reductions or request reductions into your planning. But what does that actually mean? Because part of the utilization stabilization is to maintain critical services that we can't afford
Correct.
to skimp on at this point in time.
Well, there's something else, and I'm going to bring it up, that I'd like to consider. I know each time we go through this, we look at the 65-35. We're, I think, approaching an era where we're going to have some problems all the way around meeting our funding needs. And to that degree, before we worry about whether there's a 65-35 or any other kind of split, the way we've gone about or see here some of what we've got for the town in general, I'd like to see some of these similar numbers with respect to the schools, and we can then talk intelligently about what the implications are if we try to get the town some funding in certain areas, but what's that mean to the schools and vice versa? What can either group live with or without? And I'm saying that in terms of, in essence, doing an analysis without the 65-35, because I don't think in this tight time it's necessarily an appropriate way to approach the budget. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm not saying it's incorrect. I'm just saying I think we need to rethink it. But I don't have enough information about the schools at this point to make any decisions. I do have information here about the town. I can see very specifically some of the implications, and they're tough. And I'm sure the schools will present us similar information, but the question is, what are the implications if we take the total amount and say, here's what we've got, and divvy it up in different manners to try to meet absolutely critical needs before we worry about even dipping into stabilization.
Well, I would say I don't disagree with that. The methodology is important, obviously. But if I go through the exhibit, which gives us the revenue picture. I'm talking about the exhibit now that does not include stabilization.
Yep.
Essentially, on a total revenue available for services, when you take into account the mandated services we've already got, is $411,000. Is that the right number?
That's correct. 411,715.
We have on the screen 611, but that includes the 200,000.
That was the two, but the previous one was the one without the pink
Right.
line.
So
Right.
without using stabilization, we're in a position where we got about a round number, $400,000 of increased revenue after all the expenses are taken out. And that includes the level fund, or including the state aid, which is basically level funded from last time. I mean, it's no increase in it.
Right.
Right.
So, the reality is that there's going to be that number, the $400,000 number, no matter how you split it, is going to require some tough decisions about, and maybe what you're suggesting, Pete, is that, you look at your operation and you say, okay, where can I find some ability to reduce the budget? Keeping in mind that the lion's share of our budget, the overwhelming share of our budget is personnel cost.
Of course.
That's the big number.
Right.
We can, not order pencils or, boy, talk about a guy from the dark ages. I don't think we buy any pencils anymore, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, whatever it is, the ability to cut costs from supplies is pretty limited. So, I mean, is it going to, what is it that we think we would need to help guide our administrators here as to how we want to see them take a look at this, another look at this, to try to determine how we, live with still a reasonably optimistic viewpoint of increased revenue year over year of $400,000 on a budget in excess of 30 million.
Yeah. I'd like to add to what my colleague has said in terms of, it's something that I would look at from both the town general management and the schools to go through it in detail and perhaps have a meeting with those two key entities where we look at what are the implications if on all sides. I realize that we have many constraints on both sides. So I'm not suggesting that this isn't an incredibly difficult process, but I think it's one that we have to do in a shared manner where we all understand this may be the best we've got before we get into stabilization, and things could get somewhat worse in the future. And we do ourselves a service by looking at it now in detail, in preparation, not just for this coming fiscal year, but the implications for the future also, because I think that really needs to be done. And it's got to be, in my estimation, this is just mine, a collaborative effort. But that's my view.
Well, I mean, certainly it's going to be done collaboratively, one way or the other. I mean, we're all in this together. How do we work through the budget, to try to maintain services in an era where, we're, even if 400 is the right number, it's still a somewhat optimistic number, conservatively optimistic, I guess. I mean, I don't see in the short run, at least in my view, a big problem in terms of revenue vis-a-vis real estate taxes and whatnot. There will be people who are going to have to, work to pay their taxes. I know that, harder. So it could see a dip. Local receipts are probably going to be hit, particularly meals tax and whatnot. So, I mean, the risk of trying, for me, the risk of operating under this $400,000 number is probably not too bad, at least for FY21, given the fact that we would have the opportunity in November to make adjustments. And I'm not arguing against stabilization being utilized. I'm sort of wavering back and forth here. But to your point, utilizing stabilization to achieve what? And if it's to achieve, if we don't believe that we've taken a hard enough look at things, then we're not actually, prudent stewards of this. So I don't know what you mean by, detail, more detail. The detail's always in the details, but,
Yeah,
and I don't know whether we want to spend a little bit of time here going through the, our line items. That we indicate to folks that we're taking our hard look, but
well,
you can't get this done where, a large majority of your cost. I mean, whatever we do right now, we're going to be discussing a smaller percentage of the total cost of the town operation than is the case on the education side. And that's fine. It's not, but that's the truth. I mean, if we were to look at this and just say, okay, everybody gets to go up by, some percentage from last year. That percentage, which is 400,000 in a $30 million budget, is a pretty low number.
yeah. No, I think, I hear what you're saying. My concern right now is we factor out all the things that we've talked about here that have to be dealt with right off the top. Then going through by department and looking at what are the real must-haves. And that's throughout the town. I mean, I know ambulance is going to come with certain level of gear that they have to have that has to be replaced, whether it's ambulance or firefighters, things like that. And we're not going to be able to deny them if in fact it's expired. But we have to look at that and the implications throughout the whole town is all I'm suggesting, including the schools, where everybody has to state their case for the absolute necessities and say, okay, here's what we have to have. And that doesn't get into 65-35. That gets into 411,000. And we see what we've got to fund that. And then if there are things left over, we can talk about whether it's 65-35 or who has the next level of absolute need. I mean, in some respects, if you think about it, getting to that level of detail isn't a whole lot different than what has been put together by our capital planning committee for their capital plan and the way they look at things and triage them. But it meant that it took some time to go through, understand what was going to be put into that plan and coming out with some recommendations. And I'm saying that a similar kind of process, we have to sit down as a town and go through and understand what we really have to support the absolute needs going forward. And that's, I think, something that needs to be done sooner than later.
Carol or Mike, what is it that you advise knowing, do we have a calendar, I guess, first of all, that brings us right up to the point of final town meeting warrants as relates to the budget and all the ancillary budget-related meetings between now and then?
We did develop a calendar. Obviously, it's been shifted a little bit because of the change in the town meeting date. I believe that our, let me just grab the calendar I have here.
The final recommendations from the Finance Committee are going to be made on May 20th. And the Finance Committee report to the printers going on May 26th. And then they're going to mail to the residents on June 1st. And with the town meeting scheduled for June 8th.
And Carol, we'll have the PDF version of this for the website. As soon as before it goes to the printer, right? Can we post that earlier than the whole mailing process?
As soon as it's determined it's the final one, we can give it to you and have it posted.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, obviously, the Finance Committee would like the recommended numbers as early as possible, but I would say that probably the board's meeting on on May 11th would probably be as late as we'd want to go to give the finance committee at least a couple of meetings to chew on those numbers and give its final recommendations. But, you know, there's a lot to do in those 2.5 weeks. And what Carol and I can do between now and Monday, we will be meeting with a number of department heads. We will look at, you know, what additional cuts are needed. As I mentioned, we're still about 114,000 off with
Well,
the,
180.
I'm sorry,
184.
without the 200,000,
Yeah.
we're at 180, 181? $184,801 that we still have to cut. And that's in addition to the cuts we're recommending, and we still have to meet with department heads about those recommended cuts. So we will have to come up with, what we can do is come up with a number of cuts to meet the 114, and then the additional cuts to meet the 184. We can try to get those by Monday. We'll do our best to do that and see what we can come up with by your meeting on Monday. It may need an additional meeting, special meeting of the board sometime between your meeting on the 27th and 11th, perhaps, to hash out these numbers in more detail.
Is it either possible or prudent to try to have a representative from the board, try to meet with a few representatives from the school side to examine their budget in some detail, the way we're doing it here, so that we begin to get some idea of what's going on?
I believe the school committee is supposed to go for the finance committee. I believe it's on the 29th.
Yes.
So everybody have the school budget then,
So that's next Wednesday.
right?
Do we have the full detailed school budget?
No, we do not have any of the school budget.
And in terms of asking questions about it, are we allowed to ask questions about it, or is it pretty much intact from our input?
I don't know. Mike would have to,
Certainly, I mean, if you're looking at it from a position of the select board can certainly ask to meet with representatives of the schools to discuss the budget. I don't think there's a formal requirement or responsibility in writing of the school to do that, but certainly as the elected leaders of the community, I would think they would want to at least discuss the budget and the different impacts to any cuts to their budget with the school committee or members of the school committee if a member of the board wanted to meet with them, or if you wanted to have a joint meeting. That's what was required. Otherwise, I believe the historical process is for the school committee to put together their budget, present it to the finance committee, and answer questions of the finance committee. Because technically, it's not a budget under the control of the select board. But the select board makes its recommendations as to the overall budget, including the school budget.
Well, I don't want people to have the impression that this is some secret thing they're doing. They have a formal process just like we do, and it's presented to the committee. There's a formal hearing on it, and a community-wide hearing that allows people to go and look at the budget and ask questions about it. So it's not like it's in some secret room. But the issue really here is that I'll call it the perspective of the town's financial condition going into the budget, which I think that doesn't mean we don't need to look at detail and feel comfortable that where people are making adjustments are the right adjustments to make. But the problem's going to be And I'm not suggesting it's the case. The problem will be if the school folks have a different view of the top line. I mean, the top line is really the issue here before we get into splits and everything else, because the top line, which is the total receipts coming in the door, is going to be less than we had expected 6 months ago, when we were talking about and debating new growth and new revenue from the marijuana businesses. The new growth has slowed, construction has slowed, the marijuana business has been shut off. So those, plus the economic condition in general. So these conditions have changed substantially from our point of view. So I agree with my colleagues that what we ought to do is at least have a conversation, public conversation about the top line. And frankly, you can debate then not only the top line, but have some conversation about utilizing stabilization. And if we're gonna, I think we need to have that conversation, because I'm pretty confident that folks on the school side are going through the same thought process we're going through, because they're not immune from what's going on either. So that, in a way that is collaborative, as my colleagues indicated, I think we'll make some progress here. And then from that will flow, because to me, the bigger issue right now is not the split, it's the top line. But maybe you don't agree with me, the others don't agree with me. And we're dealing in an era of unexpected scarcity. Unexpected 6 months ago, I mean.
Well, I concur in that. It's all pretty nebulous at this point. We know things aren't necessarily going to go as we had anticipated as short a time ago as 2 months. So I agree with my colleague regarding the top line. I would like to have an opportunity to have some kind of a dialogue with the school committee or representative thereof for one of the select board also, to get some understanding of what things are actually have to be dealt with this coming year, because we're all looking at very, very tight situation. It's not a situation where we should be challenging each other. It's one where we just got to understand what the options are if. And I'm uncomfortable now in that we don't fully understand not only our own, but certainly not on their side either. And I would like to get a little more comfortable with that as this proceeds. And it's coming down the road pretty quick right now.
Well, I mean, I certainly can support having a dialogue with them. And if it's the whole committee or some members of it, that's fine. I mean, I do believe that from the staff point of view, I'd like to see, the business management of the school and the business management of the town underneath the finance director, have some joint conversation here about what they might be presenting to us as a whole. Not trying to interfere with the committee's responsibility to develop its own budget, but I think that we're all going to have to feel comfortable going to town meeting with, a scenario that we can support. Because the last thing we want to do is be in a situation where haven't reached agreement, and having agreement in the light of the tough decisions that are going to be made. So
I would totally concur with that.
I don't know what the mechanism is, and I don't feel comfortable asking for that kind of a conversation until we've gone through ours a little bit, so that we're going in there in an informed way about what we think we might be able to do to try and contain costs here. And this scenario that it calls for scenario modeling, really. What you would do is to say, okay, what if it comes in this? What if it comes in this -2? And what if it comes in this -10?
Yep.
Now, I don't know whether we got enough time to do that. But again, we're operating here under our worst case scenario with the revenue numbers holding up. It does not take into account revenue numbers in critical areas starting to dip. And I'm not suggesting we should plan FY21 for that, but we need to have a contingency in place if in fact we find ourselves in that situation. So,
Madam Chair, I was going to recommend, based on, you know, how the conversation here went, if the board would like, I could certainly reach back out to the departments, department heads, and ask them to develop a budget with some percentage reduction should state aid or other revenues come in far less than we predict. You know, say, you know, take their current budget and submit a budget of, you know, 5% below that. What would that mean for their departments, and what cuts and adjustments they would need to do, and how that would affect the operations and the service levels? We certainly could do that. The one problem we're probably going as far as the annual town meeting in June is that we're not likely, based on the history of the Commonwealth, to have those local aid numbers probably till August. So to be able to really incorporate accurate aid numbers from the Commonwealth between now and the town meeting is unlikely. So, you know, certainly we can go through the process of looking at what this means, what departments would have to prepare for should that scenario develop, and the state was for reasons that they would know would cut our aid dramatically. What would that mean? So that's something that it's an exercise we could go through, so people are aware. But again, I don't know if we're going to have any real numbers to work with from that sector before the town meeting.
Yes.
well, I think it's important for us to have a budget prepared for town meeting. But if we have a contingency and we find that the revenue is not there in August, we have the ability, you know, to call a special town meeting to adjust the budget and, you know, adjusting it downward. I mean, it's not like we don't have some options here. You know, policy question at this point is, when you go in for your budget for the town meeting, what scenario are you going to propose? And that's where we are now, but I just think it helps us, and it helps the entire enterprise, if we also have done some analysis of what it would be if we really begin to see serious revenue shortfalls. Because, you know, we can't be making it up as we go along. It's important for us to have a fallback position.
Well, I would agree on the fallback.
We might find ourselves in a situation where we feel as though the short-term picture does require us to seek the town's approval to go into the stabilization to help us get through this period. So anyway.
Well, my immediate interest too would be, Mike, if when you talk with the departments, not just that they're taking either a percentage cut or some cut to get the 180,000 down. I think that was the number, 184.
Yes.
But to understand even there what the implications are when they do that. I mean, we're not cutting 184,000 out of their planning for the budget without having some impact on what their plans or needs are. And we certainly, I believe, ought to understand what that is, because that gets us into the understanding of how hard this is going to hurt us. And this could turn out to be a precursor for where we might be headed over the next year. I mean, I hate to think of it that way. I'd like to think that that's not going to happen, but as they say, if wishes were horses. So at this stage, those are the pieces I would like, from my perspective at any rate. And then if there's time before town meeting for them to also put together what I'd call that what if scenario, great. We're going to need that, I believe. And I happen to agree with my colleague. That's very important. Whether we can put all these other pieces together and that prior to town meeting, I'm not sure.
Yes, I would I agree with everything that's been said, and I'm willing to grip the third rail because I think that I'm frustrated that we aren't all working as one cohesive unit because the school budget has, a different structure and different sourcing, and I understand that. But clearly the impacts to services fall disproportionately on the town. It's no secret that we've been trying to fund and maintain roads. That's really what taxpayers see the most. We're trying to figure out how we can provide any temperance or relief against, before we even had this catastrophe. And I'm looking at the performance issue that has to be presented, which is when you have students leaving the district, it seems to me there's a cause and effect. So I feel like the 65-35 discussion as a holistic conversation needs to be absolutely on the table. We can't be saying to our public safety departments that are going to be impacted by the housing communities that are deliberately no to low impact to schools, do more with less disproportionately to the impact that they are going to receive with this influx or shift of resident, probably demanding more of those services. And we're not funding, we're not adjusting for the contraction of the population of the school against the deliberate targeted growth of the highest population of the town, which is over 55. And frankly, I'm frustrated because our budget process, all of the town departments, Mr. Kaczynski, came before the select board and or were prepared to, in the case of the town administrator and director of finance, on February 8th. So that, and they came with their forecasts and they came with assumptions and hypotheses. And the fact that it's now April 22nd and we're going to do a race to the finish to hurry up and wait because of the protracted expectation on state funding is frankly frustrating. I mean, we need partners in this process. We're all dealing with the same catastrophe. And it seems to me that the revenue impact to the ecosystem of the town is going to be profoundly implicated. And the one thing that I want to say to the public that I've had conversations with the town administrator about is how we can maximize utilization of, through no fault of their own, any underutilized staff. And to the extent the schools, the town, FinCom, or any department not just looks at this, Mr. Kaczynski, from a 5% budget cut, but looks at this as an opportunity of reinvention, of combining resources, of, for example, putting facilities management together, putting technology together. Let's really create more with less. Simply continuing business as usual, we can't do it. And we've known we haven't been able to do it for a long time. And the Mass Municipal Association has been drilling this in with ample programming, webinars, annual conferences, saying to us, you cannot do business the way that you always did. You have to do many more cooperative partnerships, intertown department partnerships and interdepartment partnerships. So I think it's broader than just saying cut 5%, because that exercise, frankly, is going to be cutting the lowest hanging fruit. And I think that our charter has to be much more bold than that. I yield the floor.
Well, I'm certainly open to any suggestions from the board for different approaches. And my approach to ask department heads to look at a 5% cut doesn't mean necessarily that's what would happen, but it would illustrate the different impacts, and then the board and I would certainly be discussing, the relative impacts and which of those impacts has the greatest negative impact on the community, and we would try to lessen those any way possible. But at least it provides an exercise for the department heads to do some real critical thinking about their departments And if they were forced to make those difficult decisions, where would they choose to cut in order to minimize the impact to their operations and the services to the citizens? So I do agree on one level that a flat cut that way is not probably the best way to make any final adjustments, but it's, I think, a needed exercise so that we have the information we need and understand to know how to have the least negative impact possible with making downward adjustments to departmental budgets if that became necessary.
And my understanding is that the school project, at the end of the day, even with all of the unforeseen expenses, there was a contingency fund. But at the end of the day, the final bond program is, in fact, should be under budget, correct?
I believe I believe it's over 3 million under budget. And I don't want to give exact numbers because I think
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
By saying a number, you've made it exact.
Okay.
Very important for the ESBC to conclude its project. It's only a couple of months, or maybe even less than a month before it'll be concluded. At that point in time, we'll know what the situation is. And the result of that means that money will not have to be collected by us from our taxpayers. It doesn't free up a bunch of money for other purposes. Well, let's just be clear on that.
That's correct.
And I strongly believe, and I don't want this to be, I don't want any misinterpretation of this. I have no doubt in my mind that the school committee is going through the same kind of conversation we're going through, amplified by 10, because they just had their function shut down for another 2 months. So I believe the school committee would be more than willing to sit down with us and try and work through this collaboratively. And I think it's incumbent upon us to have our hand outreach our hand to suggest we should get together on this matter, because I think that together we can resolve the issues. And it's an issue that is going to be, to the point made by my colleagues, something that has to be decided by us as the leaders of the town within the next frankly, 6 weeks.
So I would just ask to provide maximum flexibility, Mr. Kaczynski, if you could work with whomever between FinCom and the school committee to dual post these various meetings as select board meetings, then it will remove the meeting to meeting coordination to determine whether or not there's quorum and give us full latitude as schedules allow for our participation. I know my time feels very fluid right now, so I appreciate that type of relief in order to be flexible in attending.
Certainly, I can speak to you after the meeting and set up a system, talk about setting us up a system that meets with what you're looking for proper communication and understanding of where the different meetings are happening, and perhaps set up a time for either members of the select board and the school committee to get together or have a full joint meeting. We can talk about that.
And I think you had mentioned, or Carol mentioned, the existence of a calendar with some target dates. It would probably be helpful just to have that calendar with a disclaimer on it that says subject to change, but just have a master calendar so that the community can attend if there is interest with whatever Zoom meeting ID numbers are going to be used by any given host. I think that would be really helpful too. Then it's completely transparent and anybody can find a meeting that works for them and attend. And it would also probably be helpful to know which ones are being televised, because I don't know that every single one is. But that should probably also be noted so that if somebody looks at that meeting and they identify one that they can watch live, and that's their preference to do so, that's indicated.
Certainly, we can certainly update the master budget calendar that was put out in early February. We'll update that for the new town meeting date. And I don't believe all the meetings are set in stone, the meeting dates, but we can certainly do some research, find out what meetings are in place, and update a calendar of meetings related to the budget as we know them today.
So, Mr. Kaczynski, are you asking the board to identify a percentage that every department would then come to the table with, or maybe some staggered percentage? You know, what does a 4% cut look like? What does a 7% cut look like, or something like that, contraction? And included also in that is, how could we, in fact, you know, continue some of the services that if they're only under your department, they might be cut, but if they were collectively merged with another department, we might be able to put the resources together and not have the cut be as severe. So, you know, whatever it is, you know, whatever function, could be IT, could be technology services, could be data entry. So I'm just wondering if there's something we can do that invites the leadership of the town to contribute some smart ideas, because they're in the day-to-day, you know, blocking and tackling of providing services. And maybe they have some ideas that they've never had a forum to present before.
Certainly. I mean, I would be happy to talk with the department heads about that. If the board has any feedback today in regards to what type of alternate budget you'd like them to work on, we could talk about that today or Monday, whatever the board is more comfortable with. Either way, I can certainly send out and reach out to all the department heads to let them know that's, you know, another request for updated budgets will be coming through for, you know, should revenues drop. I can let them know that, and they can be prepared to put something together and start reviewing their budgets right away to meet any of requests from the board to present updated budgets.
Well, I'm not Nostradamus, but I don't think we need any magic to know that revenues have dropped and are continuing to drop and are inescapably going to drop. We know, and we've identified some of those today. So, and I also don't want to hold up that thinking process. To my colleague, to Jim's comment, you know, we have to accomplish a lot of thinking under very new circumstances in a very short window of time in order to prepare for town meeting. So I guess I would be looking for, you know, the director of finance to offer some guidance based on the hypotheses that you've seen, based on whatever even, you know, tea leaves have come from the state, and based on, you know, obviously the loss of the cannabis income and some of the other assumptions that were made. What is it that we should be saying? I would propose two different levels. I would propose three things. What I would put on the table is percentage A, percentage B, and reinvention of your function. Those would be the three things I would be really interested to see. But I don't want to just arbitrarily pick numbers and say 4%, 7%, because I don't know if they have any basis of foundation. So I'm really looking to the financial experts to weigh in.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
My view is that just like we are asking the town to evaluate the relative value of services, I think that it's incumbent upon our administration to do the same. I don't favor telling each department they have to cut their budget by X%, because that assumes we have the right mix between public safety, library, culture, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know, in terms of the mechanics of how the town administrator and the finance director come back with a number that says, okay, here's a proposed budget which would enable us to reduce our costs by, pick a number, 3%. That does not translate in my mind to telling each department you got to cut 3%, because there's no judgment being made on our end about the relative value in the intermediate to short term of those functions. So I would much prefer us to ask for, and I'm happy to do 5%, whatever it is, come back with, you know, assuming your revenue number is down 5, assuming your revenue is constant. And we've already got scenarios here, I'm assuming, where there's some increase in revenue. And I don't see us getting any more than that, if anything. That's just my view. I don't want us to just suggest that it's across the board, because that just is not us taking a hard look at the services from the municipal side to determine where we need to, you know, perhaps provide more, and where we're going to have to, at least in the short term, have a little bit heavier cut. I don't know. I mean, that's just my view. And I'm not of the view, frankly, at this point in time, that the revenue is going to fall off the cliff in the next few months. I'm much more concerned with what happens in the fourth quarter of this year, and I'm talking the calendar year, and the first and second quarters of next year, which is the tail end of our budgets, our fiscal year. So that's my view. I would prefer to have, a thoughtful, selective review of each item rather than just mandating some percentage by department. Now, if the town administrator and the finance director think that's the best way to get and the fastest way to do it, that's fine. But I'm expecting some level of, I'm hoping for some level of, conversation, debate back and forth from the senior chief administrative officer and the chief financial officer, not just the department heads.
I look at it as that's the kind of function that I do look to the town administrator to be performing, to work with the department heads, to give the guidance, and to overall set the tone, and to take into account how he feels or recommends that they look at things for the future. And our process is to look at what he's done and evaluate it and see if that makes sense in terms of where we think the budgeting ought to be going and in context with what we see coming out of the state, the economy, and so on, and saying, okay, that makes sense or that doesn't make sense, and add our views to it at that point. But I think the first cut, we've asked him to be the chief executive for the town, and it's his decision on how he makes that, and we evaluate accordingly.
With all due deference to my colleague, the chief executive of the town is the select board.
Well, he's running.
Administrative officer is charged with bringing us the information.
Well, he's, let's say he's the chief operating officer in that case. But I think you understand what I'm getting at.
Yes. Can I
He's
just
the
go
one
back
who has
to
to make operations work.
to the exhibits we already have,
Yes.
which is to say, okay, we have an exhibit that has a certain assumption of revenue and a recommended utilization of stabilization to provide, some level of service. And I guess what we're asking for is, what would that entail? What is it that we'd be doing with that money, so that we can evaluate exactly where that would take us? We had another scenario which says, assume there's no utilization of stabilization. Where would that bring us? And I think that from my point of view, what I'm looking for is have an assumption that, one of these numbers, they each decline by, state aid is down by 5%, and I'm just making this up, and tax collection is down by 1% instead of up. What would that look like? And it's line by line, but, it won't take, well, it'll take some work, obviously, but to identify where the big cost items are. And, we can already guess where it is, because the big cost is headcount.
And all the associated issues associated with that.
Well, that's right. So I, for one, would like to find a way not to have to reduce headcount on the municipal side anyway. And I'm not suggesting I have an answer for the school side, because I don't believe that we've got a lot of fat in the system. But we need to know that in order to make a rational recommendation for a budget for the coming fiscal year.
But that comes back to the whole concept I think you were pointing out earlier, a series of assumptions and then a series of implications associated with those assumptions. And that's what we're looking at from him to get us.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then it's up to the board to make its decision as to what it propose with the finance committee and the town for a budget for FY21.
Right.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
if I may, so what I would recommend and what my intention was before the meeting started was at a minimum to work with the finance director to have a budget proposal to the board for your meeting on Monday, which utilizes the revenue of both the $611,715 as well as the $411,715 to show the relative impacts on the municipal departments, or at least a scenario that shows the impacts on those departments to meet those limited revenue numbers. Certainly, if the board would like to then continue the exercise to say we'd like to look at what, a 3% or a 5% cut to our net revenues, or cuts to state aid next year, we could look at that and provide an additional level showing what those cuts would look like, which would be pretty severe. So, and they would certainly, we could certainly follow along with that. And obviously, we're going to try to follow along with what revenues, what the revenue picture is, and as we get information. But as I said, if we, to be able to have that for accurate numbers for June, is unlikely. So it should those numbers change dramatically, we probably will need a special town meeting to address changes there later in the summer. So it all becomes an issue of how deep the cuts you'd like to make based on what information we have now, and not really knowing exactly what is in store for us as far as revenues, because of the uncertainty of the current situation.
Mhm.
So for Monday, I could work with the finance director to present at least those two scenarios, while at the same time reaching out to department heads to have them at least, maybe without giving them a number per se, but have them start looking at their budgets and ask them if additional cuts were required from their departments. How would they move forward with trying to do that with minimal damage to the operations and service to the public?
I think that, I think we have to start somewhere and put a stake in the ground. And the other question that I have, and I think this is maybe a question for Jim McCaffrey, but I think it would be helpful to have, especially since we are bringing it to a conclusion, kind of, if you can, and I don't want to be simplistic about it, but kind of the one-pager summary of the school bonding program that shows, basically the different categories of years for which certain amounts were bonded. And I think that what I want to understand, and Jim, I'm not sure that I totally understood your response, so I apologize for that. But the school is under budget to the tune of a good amount on the basis of obviously very astute decision making. And my question is, was that amount in fact already borrowed? And because I thought we had borrowed pretty close to the end, I guess I would like to know what the status of that is, because if it was borrowed, then what happens if we over borrowed? Because the rates were advantageous when doing so, which I remember authorizing some of those decisions. But I think it would be helpful to see kind of the summary of the project, to include over time. We made various decisions on specific, I'll call them add-ons. They were features that weren't anticipated that were added, or something that was corrected, and it required going into that contingency amount. I think it would be helpful to see the big picture since we're at that point. And I'm just wondering what happens with that amount that I don't know if we borrowed it or we were prepared to borrow it. I just don't recall.
Well, the answer is going to be, go ahead, Mike, go ahead. I mean, the answer is going to be, we're going to need the treasurer to do an analysis for us to show us what the implications of the bonding were. Because the release of the contingency is a timing issue. Doesn't necessarily happen right at the time that the project is completed, because you may have some leftover things you got to do. But I think the complexity of borrowing would require us to have the treasurer give us a sort of a review of what the implications are for the project coming in under budget, knowing full well that, a component of this may actually be some of the contingency refund may be shared with the MSBA, the Massachusetts State folks who helped to pay for the project. So.
Yes, thank you, Mr. McCaffrey. I agree fully. I think that, what you're requesting is an updated report from the town treasurer as to the total costs submitted for payment on the project, as well as the bonded amount to date. I have had a number of discussions with both the finance director and the treasurer about the need to keep a close eye on that and make sure we do not overborrow. And I will let her answer those questions in a report to the board, which we can get back to the board in short order to give you a snapshot on where we are. And as was pointed out earlier, the project is not 100% complete yet. So final closeout will take a little more time, but we can certainly give you a status report from the Treasurer's office as to the borrowing and the amount of bills that have been paid out in relation to the project.
So just as a point of reference on this, the permanent bonding on the school has, the portion that is complete, she has done. There is an outstanding a bond anticipation note for $1.5 million that will be, it will be permanently bonded once all expenses are in. If it doesn't need to be that amount, then she won't bond permanently the remainder of it, only what is needed for the completion of the project. There is no over borrowing.
Right, and the project manager has been in contact with the treasurer on a regular basis to give them a sense of, give the treasurer's office a sense of where the project stands, particularly with how we would treat any costs or cost relief attributable to having delivered the project under budget. So there is, recurring dialogue going on there to make sure that we're not over borrowing. But it's important for us to get a status report, I think, from the treasurer as to where we stand.
Well, especially the two go hand in hand. It's budget and budget. It's community spending decisions. The town wants to understand and feel that leadership isn't just asking them for more when arguably more of us have less. They want to know that, the leadership is being extremely attentive to the details. And that's why I personally would like to see some inventiveness functionally, because I think there's probably some great ideas that never really have liftoff because there's no vehicle to do that, partnering and such. I can't imagine that exercise would be for naught. So what do we want to leave here with action items?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yep.
I would recommend that the board obviously hold off on any decision about the use of stabilization at this time. That the finance director and I will continue to work on the budgets with the goal of having two different budgets to present to the board on Monday. One with the stabilization funds, one without, and to, I will reach out to the department heads in regards to having them take a hard look at their budgets and start thinking of ways to reduce the bottom line of their budget should that become necessary, and to be ready to present, what the impacts of those cuts would be. And then, following that, we would have discussions if it came to that as to where those cuts would ultimately be made from more of a better perspective. So I think the short term is to, and it's no small lift, I can assure you, based on where we are with the budgets. And it'll be no small lift to cut an additional $184,000 from the budgets on the municipal side. So for the board's review. So we will work on that on the next couple of days, and then the board could have a discussion on that at your meeting on the 27th. And I would probably recommend a follow-up budget meeting sometime between the 27th and your regular meeting on May 11th.
Yeah, that sounds fine. If you could also tighten that calendar of expected meetings that don't just involve us or are not even necessarily being led by this board, but take a look at that so that not only can it be kind of a community-wide document, but also institutionally we can take care of the required public open meeting law, public notifications with postings as a select board, so that as each meeting unfolds, any complement of the members of the board can attend. I'm
Very good.
comfortable with that as an action item. Do my colleagues have anything to add to that specifically? Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I would like to ask about the budget document you provided us with.
Yes.
Is there anything in there? What does that budget document entail at this point?
That is the, and I'll let Carol jump in if she wants to here, but that essentially is the departmental requests from all the.
Those are the, yeah.
And
Those are
it also shows the variances between the FY21 requests and the FY21 budgets of all those departments. Carol?
Yes, so that's all it is. The yellow column is the FY20 adopted town meeting budget, and the green column, FY21 department request, that's exactly what came over from each of the departments. So, and then the next column is just the variance between the FY21 request and the FY20 final budget. And then the next column is just the percent variance between year over year.
But when we're talking about cuts, the cuts that you're describing to us, what are we cutting from?
So we're taking the green column, FY21 department request.
Yeah.
And the town administrator and I have been working, going by each department, trying to see where there are reductions that we feel are appropriate. And we'll be meeting with the department heads to review those before submitting them to you on Monday, on the 27th.
So these numbers here do not add up to your, let's use $200,000 of stabilization number.
So these numbers here have it does not have the stabilization in there. No, you're right. We don't have the stabilization.
Let me rephrase the question because I want to make sure I'm.
Okay.
When you gave us a scenario which said, okay, here's a scenario for revenue and use of stabilization.
Yeah.
That, and then you allocated another $214,000 to that for the municipal side. That gave you the municipal top line number, right?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, and that top line number was going to have to be reduced by what number?
So on the spreadsheets that you have now,
Yeah.
if you look down, it says total budget, and you keep going down, it says budget totals, available revenues.
Yeah.
And you'll see a minus number. So we have to reduce what the request came in from the department managers or department heads by $647,000.
Okay, so these requests would have to be reduced by $647,000.
Right.
And we don't have those numbers.
The town administrator and I have worked on them. We do have what we have been able to reduce, 400,000. We have another 184,000 that we need to review, but you do not have our reductions yet. No.
Okay, that's what I'm just trying to get at. So this
Right.
exhibit that we have, because there's nothing that says that we don't have to work between meetings too. The numbers that we have really are the proposed numbers.
Yes.
And if we had plenty of revenue, these would reflect what the department heads have recommended to us to deliver the services to the community that they feel they need.
Yes.
Okay. So that includes level service plus
Yes.
additions. And of course, level service, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's just level service with contractual increases in them. So
Plus-
these do not include their above service level, with the exception, there were 2 categories that they included their above service. The town clerk put it in the green number, and so
Yeah.
did the rec department put theirs in.
What about the 4 firefighters?
They are not in this number.
Okay,
The fire chief did not include those. Those would be an above service level.
I understand that, but I mean, at this point, I just want to make sure I understand what's in these numbers, what we're cutting from.
Sure. Sure.
So in terms of, for example, the fire department, it's level staffing with contractual increases
Yes,
and some costs associated, not, I don't mean to trivialize them, but
right.
so what we will see is a budget, at least at the highest level, where these numbers are reduced.
Yes.
And I mean, I, for one, I'm, you know, assuming we've already done some work on this, I'm more than happy to look at, you know, with and without use of stabilization. But I think from our perspective, there has to be, at least from a modeling point of view, a more draconian number, which says what, at some level, the revenue declines. Now, you pick the number. I mean, you might argue that that's not realistic. I think 5% is a lot. But what we need is some evaluation of where we think this might come, given the fact that we're all shooting in the dark. I mean, I get that.
Right. So what I would like for the town administrator and I to present to you is, I would like us to present to you a balanced budget with our recommendations for reductions.
Yeah.
And then I would like to be able to present an additional 2 budgets as contingency budgets, one at maybe 5% and one at maybe 10%. So we'd have a balanced, a 5 and a 10. But I don't know that we would have that 5 and 10% one available for the 27th. That's going to take a little more thought.
That would be difficult to do, because I'd certainly want to at least be able to speak to all the department heads and give them an opportunity to look at their budgets before we presented anything like that.
Right, because we'd have to give you a base balanced budget, and then we do the 5% off the balanced budget, and then
But the
it's
balance,
10%.
excuse me just a second, the balanced budget depends on how you're going to treat stabilization money.
That's correct.
Right,
So there's 2 answers to
Two
this.
balanced budgets. There's
Yeah.
2 balanced based on revenue.
But I would assume
Right.
you're reasonably prepared to do that, because that's how you've gotten to these numbers. Okay.
yes.
And I just would ask that you at least start with the school business manager, let them know what we're thinking,
Hello, this is Lauren.
pendant. Because we
Hi, how are you?
be reaching out to them.
Oh, yeah. It's, you know, what's horrible about this, and you guys are in the thick of it, is
Lauren, you're
you know, I don't know how you do.
okay. Where was I? At some point, you know, I think we need to give them fair warning that this is what we're thinking about. And I'd like to know from them if they could just share with us what direction they think they're thinking about, so that we at least have everybody understanding what work's already going on.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
I mean,
We can certainly ask them.
well, I want to at least alert them. I don't want them to be, you know, it's important if we're going to be collaborating for them to let them know what the outcome of this meeting was and what our desire is to try and meet with them at a reasonably short time frame to try and work through some of these issues.
Right,
I would also like, on the 184, Mike, and Carol, as you're going through it, obviously this means that they're going to be cutting certain things out of what they wanted for the department. I'd like to have some idea of what that is, what the implications are for them when they do that.
We could certainly do that, and just to let you know, there's already implications before we even get to the 184, because as Carol had said, we've already cut hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the cuts we've made so far would not result in any layoffs or reduction in staff, but the additional cuts may very well do to get to the 184.
I, for one, would be interested in what you've done thus far and what you're going to do for the 184, so I get some level of detail and feel for what the implications are to the town. That's my personal view anyway.
Right, I think we can do that. We can give a breakdown of the key items that have been cut or had to be reduced as a result of it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the documents?
No, I just want to say that I know, I don't want anybody to get the impression that we don't realize that a lot of work's going on into this already. You know, under difficult situations, while our team leaders and whatnot are working hard to make sure that everybody's safe. And I do want to, you know, I'm sure I speak for all of the board to thank them very much for all the work they're doing. Sorry that the annoying fact of budgets is entering into the fray. But at this point in time, and it's still unknown, I really think we need to all work together to come up with a budget proposal that we can adopt in June. Now, if we're gonna be forced by circumstance to delay town meeting even further, then we get into a whole different, because then we have to authorize spending at prior year levels, which is not a pleasant thought. But I'm hoping that we're going to be able to find a way to conduct our town meeting that keeps everybody safe, but enables the community to adopt a budget so that we're off and running, so to speak, for fiscal year 2021 without having to try and make up ground by delaying things even further. So hopefully that will be the case.
Right, and some of that I think will depend on, you know, the governor's decision on whether and when to lift some of the restrictions. We can hold the meeting, I think, up until June 30th without, if we need to delay it another time, without serious implications. But obviously, if we go into July, then there'll be issues with getting into the next fiscal year without a budget that the state has made accommodations for, but they're still complicated and
Right.
and difficult. So certainly the preference here is to have this meeting before July 1st.
Sure. And I will second what my colleague said about, regardless of all the questions we've had and issues that have come up, we do recognize the amount of effort that you and Carol and others have put in just to get this far, and it's very much appreciated on top of everything else that's going on in town. And I'll also second the comments regarding our public safety folks and the excellent job they've been doing, given what's going on right now.
I certainly don't want to leave out the Department of Public Health, which is doing a phenomenal job of keeping track of things and keeping us on target. And it's really important for folks to pay attention. And I know there's all kinds of information that's coming from all directions, and I don't suggest you discount any of it that you think you want to follow, but when our local folks on the ground who are here with us and live with us make a recommendation, I urge everyone to try and follow that recommendation, because it's only for the best of everybody. So just a word to the wise, and I just want to be sure to call out the health department as well, because they're doing a fantastic job.
Well, in truth, I have to say all the departments have been doing a great job trying to meet the needs of the community with respect to what their job functions are. And they really are putting in extra effort to try to do that. And
I agree with that, Pete. You're right. I don't want to exclude anybody. When you think about, you know, there's a team out there making sure that we have clean water, the roads are open, and that the sewer works. And I know we've had problems, and as well as all the folks at Town Hall that are just trying to do their best for folks in town, and the people of Millis who are working hard to try and keep not only themselves in mind, but their friends and neighbors in mind. And so congratulations to all of them, and let's keep our nose to the grindstone. But
it's a good team effort.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
And certainly on behalf of the staff, I'd like to thank you for the support of the board as we've gone through this difficult, uncharted waters of something I've never dealt with before on this level, and I don't think too many have. So I think that's, Carol, do you have anything else in regards to the budget or anything else that we talked about?
No, I think we're all set. We got our marching orders. We know what we need to do.
Yep.
Well, in that case, I suppose I could move that we adjourn.
Well, I would second the motion. Our chair has apparently something that she has to deal with. I know she's got some issues that she's dealing with of a personal nature for which we extend our sympathy for sure. So I'll just call for a poll of the board on the vote to adjourn. Mr. Jermaine,
Yes.
Mr. McCaffrey, yes. So the board is now officially voted to adjourn, and our next meeting will be on Monday, April 27th. Thank you all for
4 o'clock.
at 4 o'clock.
And it will be, the meeting will be televised at that point. It'll be Zoom and televised, so.
But this meeting will also be available if people want a recording of it.
Yes, this meeting was recorded and we will upload it, and I'm going to give it to cable.
Thanks. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.